arrived on Dayar, and you asserted publicly that their love is a gift from the Lord. Would it be ethical for you to do that without first consulting Lisa? I could care less. I simply don't care, which is a great thing about being my age. My quality of life is good, you know. This was really unexpected. Jimmy Evans just said something that the whole Dayar community found incomprehensible. It was more than a casual remark. It was a shocking revelation that made us reevaluate our assumptions about Johnny Lamb. Spectators are rushing to find out solutions. A social media disaster is unfolding, and it's just going to get worse. How and why did Jimmy divulge this information? You might have your entire opinion about this topic modified if you knew the reality behind his statements. Jimmy Evans remained silent for a long time. Everyone looked on him as a reliable, confident, and reassuring presence who would always be there for the Lamb family. When times became tough, he was the one who showed up, the guest pastor, the marriage counselor, etc. However, underlying that serene depiction of a man clinging to a secret, whatever he did, he would never be able to erase that memory from his mind. Suddenly, though, everything shifted. Out of nowhere, Jimmy's silence was shattered when a conversation about a leak made its way online. There was no anger or loudness in what he stated, yet the Dayar world was rocked to its very foundation by it. Jimmy discussed a meeting that had trouble getting out of his mind for a long time in that one-on-one chat. This wasn't your average social gathering. He described it as a time that was heavy, wrong, and utterly unsuited. Seated between Jonathan Lamb and Susie, he described the atmosphere as tight and under control. Someone then requested an action from him that he had not anticipated. They wanted him to curry favor with Jonathan's mom, Joni, and get Jonathan to comply. Treat her with the utmost reverence and submit to her authority as if she were God's messenger. Jimmy paused. He went along with it even though it didn't feel right. In an effort to prevent further schism, he reiterated the idea that Johnny was representing God in his peace speech. Still, he felt the words weight on his shoulders. He became acutely aware of how incorrect they felt as he said them. He would never get over that moment. He later stated that he regretted it, even if it was years ago. Within just one statement, Johnny provides the tone for, "Oh my, it wasn't merely a matter of family relations. It was all about maintaining a system that caused more harm than good, about spiritual pressure, and about control." The floodgates were triggered when the clip leaked. Even Jimmy's trusted friends and family were confused. Supporters of the longtime viewers, including some within the ministry, began to doubt everything Dayar. Was this the type of leadership that was taking place in the shadows? Could this be what Marcus Lamb had envisioned? Most crucial, for what amount of time had everyone pretended that everything was all right? Honesty struck Jimmy hard in that moment. He claimed he was faithful, doing what was right, and defending the ministry. Silence, though, was not loyalty as he now understood. Connivance was at play. The reality, however, unpleasant, had to be released. Being bold to speak the truth and to not be a part of a cover-up. Because of that, we are now fully independent, free from the shackles of any big organization or control, and we can speak out against injustice, stand up for what's right, and inspire others. For those who have experienced trauma, hardship, or who have grown up in a culture that values denial, bringing light into the darkness and preparing the way for the Lord to cleanse the body of Christ is something we're really looking forward to. Okay, well, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has reached out to us, encouraged us, and sent words of love. The whole thing has been completely overpowering. Things were meant to be resolved at the family gathering. That was the beginning. For years, Jonathan Lamb had kept quiet while he watched the world around him crumble. His loved ones, his trust in Dayar's leadership, and the idealized portrayal that the world continued to hold on to. In the shadows cast by the spotlights and cameras, there was stillness, unspoken conflict, and unhealed scars. He wasn't planning any sort of drama or vengeance when he requested a private family gathering. It was about bringing the truth into the room at last. He skipped the formality and didn't reserve a boardroom. Ministry matters weren't at stake. The stakes were high. It was open to everyone. Relatives, partners, past and present employees. Near to Jimmy Evans, Joni, and Marcus. Joni showed up, much to his astonishment. There was a brief period of genuine optimism. Perhaps he was at last prepared to hear him out. Perhaps the barriers would crumble. That optimism, however, was short-lived. Jonathan did his best to maintain decorum as the gathering got underway. His grief over Marcus's death, Joni's apparent ease in moving on, and an underlying sense of discord in the ministry were all topics he covered. To avoid attacks and instead understand each other, he urged everyone to communicate openly and honestly. Some people started talking calmly, while others started crying. The texture was uncooked. I could feel it. They shared experiences of being left out, unheard, bewildered by the changes, and wounded by the lack of communication. Next it was Joni's turn, however this time around. She reached for her phone and set a timer, unsure if she should listen or open up. "You all have 60 seconds, she remarked in a stern manner. They initially took her to be joking. That wasn't her. A minute for each person to express their years of suffering, bewilderment, and treachery. Everyone exchanged shocked glances. It was their only option. 1 minute. After the final speaker concluded, Joni got to her feet, took stock of the audience, and declared that everyone was acting out of fear. She left after that. Absolutely no follow-up, prayers, or hugs. Douglas Weiss was her appointment, and she had a plane ticket to New York. She disappeared in an instant. The remaining individuals in the room remained motionless in shock. That was the moment when Jonathan knew he couldn't reach the mother he had hoped to. She didn't intend to rectify any situation. She was firm in her convictions and would not budge from her stance. It is important that you follow her instructions. And there's no use in your being here if you struggle with it. I am worried about it. Everything seems to provoke an argument from you, Jonathan. You need to end it. I choose not to argue. There's nothing you can't argue about. You must cease. At the very end, you must both recognize her authority. On this property and in relation to Daystar Network, she is speaking as God's representative. For God, she is the voice. Pay attention or get out of here. Indeed, that is the reality. Yes, a viewer comment is going to be posted. When you're all talking about Doug, right? So either give it a go and see what happens or go. Plus, there will be zero middle ground. Jimmy Evans sat motionless, having come anticipating a period of recovery. He came clean later on the fact that he didn't find the gathering particularly spiritual. The vibe was off. Anxieties, manipulation, and control pervaded the air. In that instant, Jimmy complied with whoever requested him to tell Jonathan to submit to his mother. Joni, he said Jonathan, had been God's voice to him and his family during the leadership position. Deep down, he felt it was wrong, so he regretted saying it. He couldn't shake that sentence. A boundary was drawn at that point for Jonathan and Susie. They were upset, but they also left the meeting with a new outlook. Something shattered. They were aware that things would never return to their previous state. They had to stop acting now. Protecting a reputation couldn't keep them silent. The issue was not defiance. Survival, safeguarding their daughter, faith, and personal integrity were paramount. The days that followed saw a general cooling of the climate. Joni remained steadfast. Silence fell on those who had stood at their side before. Those close to the ministry started accelerating away. Some people quietly contacted Jonathan and Susie to let them know they were watching but couldn't do anything to assist. Some, like Denise Boggs, Joni's close friend and counselor, pleaded with her in sincere letters to take it easy, listen, and seek God before continuing. Alongside Doug Weiss. Johnny Lamb, however, remained silent. She chose to close her circle instead. Her decisions, particularly her fast-track relationship with Doug, were solidified as she firmly stood by them. Nobody dared to doubt it, not even her own. The son was considered a traitor. Everything in the home and the ministry was now structured around that mentality of submit or leave. Rather of mending old wounds, the family gathering widened them. It was not because Jonathan and Susie quit making appearances on Dayar that. It was because they were unable to participate in something that seemed so disconnected from its previous ideals that they harbored bitterness. After then, there was no longer any respect for the subsequent quiet. I was trying to protect myself. Dayar was also starting to shift behind the scenes. People took note. Users spoke with one another using messaging. Followers of Jonathan's work had been wondering where he was. Why had Susie departed from hosting duties? What gave everything that new vibe? But nobody received responses. Smiles on air, well-rehearsed parts, broadcasts that are meticulously planned. The reality, however, remained hidden. There was more to the meeting than just family strife. The shift in power was evident. In the past, when once based on harmony and trust, now seemed to be based on dominance and public perception. It had nothing to do with sharing the experience of loss. The key was to keep going no matter who was harmed along the way. It even started to register with Jimmy Evans. His speech began to change, becoming more modestly and truthfully. Even though he meant well, he confessed that his silence had contributed to covering things up. It lingered with him, that moment when he told Jonathan to give in. Even though he now knows he was only putting on the mask for a little longer, he still believed he was helping. Some people, like Denise, attempted to contact us once more. She cautioned that Dayar's pride, rather than God, was manipulating her. That the consequences would surpass all expectations if the current course of events persisted. However, it had already taken place by that point. The staff started to depart. Some pastors turned down invitations, some benefactors withdrew their support, and some viewers began to see through the facade. It is possible that the family gathering was the catalyst. It might have been the first step toward recovery. However, it turned out to be the decisive blow. A high-stakes, emotionally charged encounter that shattered an irreparable bond. With Joni's departure came the opportunity for genuine healing. It was tragic and illuminating for Jonathan and Susie. They had a better grasp of the situation at this point. It wasn't merely about loss. Silence, control, and avoiding unpleasant realities were at the heart of this. Not to mention that they had had enough of playing along. That one encounter in the hall. The illusion was destroyed by the absence of stage lights and cameras behind closed doors. A trusting ministry, a model Christian family, and a united front. In that room, everything broke. After that, things started to change drastically. At times, it might feel like a family's entire foundation is crumbling. These are the kinds of moments that alter your perspective on the ones you've loved all your life. Behind closed doors, away from prying eyes and cameras, that moment arrived for Jonathan Lamb. It all began with an instinct. Feeling. Doubtful things were going on. Even though she was young and naive, his daughter started acting differently. He first speculated that it might be anxiety or tension. However, as he continued to observe, it became increasingly clear that this was no ordinary matter. Little things she said sent shivers down his spine, and she didn't say much. To Jonathan, it seemed too good to be true. Under no circumstances does a parent ever do this. It wasn't long before everything began to fall into place. What they indicated was terrifying. Eventually, someone she trusted in the family had harmed her. In the worst way imaginable, physically, and not emotionally or verbally. Neither the child nor their parent should ever have to deal with this kind of violation. He was impatient. He did not disregard it. Reassuring himself that it would disappear was futile. Jonathan charged toward it. He acted in the manner befitting a father. He probed for details. Questions were met with his insistence on answers. Additionally, hoped that his grandma would be safe with his parents, Joni and Marcus, and that they would back him up as he sought the truth. However, that is not the case. They withdrew from him rather than coming together. Marcus, Dayar's leader, claimed that they had already investigated the matter. The individual in question had been exonerated after an internal review. Behind the scenes, there were only a handful of chats. No experts, no cops. Marcus informed him that it had ended. Everything is resolved now. However, Jonathan's journey was only just starting. No serenity washed over him. This made him nauseous. His disappointment was further deepened when, in a last-ditch effort to get Joni to understand what was truly going on, she failed to do so. He had her doubts. She was averse to hearing it. She defended the accused while standing by Marcus. Details were even left unsolicited by her. She put an end to it. Above everything else that hurt, Jonathan had become more than just a son. Just a dad attempting to keep his own child safe. On national television, his mother had advocated for love and protection, but now she had abandoned him. My warnings went unheard. She offered no solace. His dismissal was hers. At that very second, Jonathan felt a deep inward rupture. Explanations ceased to be his goal. His request for assistance ceased. He emotionally and spiritually distanced himself. He realized he couldn't trust those whose whole lives hinged on trustworthiness after that. Not addressing the abuse was the only act of treachery. Selecting anonymity over authenticity, it was all about putting safety first. Time went by. From then on, the subject was dropped. Even at home, it's not okay. The mysteries remained hidden. Similar to a large number of those serving in the church. No matter how much Jonathan and Susie tried to move forward, be at their family sides, and keep their heads down, they were never truly healed. No one ever brought up the incident at any of the family gatherings, broadcasts, or sermons about faith and healing, so the quiet grew louder. After Marcus passed away, events picked up speed instead of dragging them out. Joni chose not to share in the family's grief. Thinking about it didn't pause her. Unbeknownst to most, she was already busy arranging a second marriage to Doug Weiss within a matter of weeks. As someone who emerged from, suddenly appeared out of nowhere and became an indelible part of Joni's life. Then it was over for Jonathan and Susie. Never again. The past was being wiped, indeed. No amount of suffering was going to be endured. Joni wasn't merely ignoring them. Even though the pain was real and profound, she was rewriting it as she went along, acting as if it never happened. Jonathan held out hope, albeit a shaky one, that perhaps there would be an opportunity to discuss things during the family meeting. Hopefully, Joni would pay attention this time. Perhaps, if only, the reality might emerge, allowing the body to start mending. That was not the outcome. Despite the fact that she had betrayed him and his daughter, he was admonished to submit once more, to honor Joni above all else, and to follow her every command. It was at that moment that Jonathan realized there was no way they could rectify this. They made no attempt at all. Nobody ever admitted that anything occurred to his daughter. Just quiet, no apologies, no second probes, no justice. It was intolerable for Susie, who was a wife and mother, to witness everything unfold. At that point, she started to speak up, initially in a low voice and later in front of others. Not to cause trouble, but because she was exhausted from trying to do it all by herself. It began to trickle down to other members of the ministry. Those who had known the family for a long time, like Denise Boggs, were shocked and saddened to hear the news. "Hey there, Denise." Had faith in the ministry, prayed with Joni, and preached with Marcus. Nevertheless, she was unable to disregard this. She penned an intimate letter for Joni. She implored her to pause, to take it easy, to listen to God's voice instead of her own ego. She cautioned her against dealing with Doug Weiss, saying he was dangerous and not who he seemed. A wolf in sheep's clothing, she said of him. Dayar, she maintained, was no longer an official ministry. Its primary function was to facilitate command and portrayal. But this time Joni changed her response. She remained silent. She was evasive. Absolutely nothing. She abandoned her grandchildren, her children, and the truth once more. The mental wounds weren't the only ones that remained. It had a spiritual dimension because when a house of worship that claims to preach truth refuses to confront its own members with the reality, the message becomes empty. Even though they didn't have all the information, viewers began to get a feel of the plot. The camera smiles looked contrived. Preaching seemed superficial. Disappearance of warmth. And gradually, the legacy began to crumble. All because of an unresolved betrayal and a secret that is too hard to mention. Once upon a time, Dayar felt unmovable. A Christian TV network wasn't all it was. A spiritual haven for millions, it was a well-known brand. Many tuned in to hear teachings, prayers, and worship services. What they saw was enough to convince them. As they took the stage, the Lamb family grinned and held hands on, sharing stories of faith, family, and God's mighty power. From the outside looking in, it appeared flawless, almost too flawless. However, a different event was taking place behind the scenes. Moreover, nobody wished to broach the subject. Initially, though, upon Marcus's departure, after Lamb's death, things started to fall apart at a quicker rate than anybody had anticipated. At first, everyone assumed Joni was just being strong and pushing through her pain. Those closest to her, though, didn't perceive it as strength. There was an air of denial. She was back on screen in no time at all. She announced her new relationship within months. She remarried Doug Weiss, a guy almost unknown in the ministry, before anyone could even catch their breath. The inquiries began at that point, both from outsiders looking in and from those actually working in the ministry. The individuals being informed about the decision-making process. Those who had been Joni and Marcus's companions for decades were abruptly excluded, disregarded, or even physically removed from gatherings. Furthermore, when requesting clarification, they ran into an impasse. They were advised to have faith in the process. God has complete control. However, the decision-maker behind the scenes wasn't God. Who was that? Joni. Quickly, everything changed. Susie and Jonathan Lamb took a step back from the spotlight. They ceased making appearances on broadcasts, providing updates, and acting as if everything was all right. That wasn't good. Actually, they were having trouble for quite some time before to Marcus's death. Their hope was that things would mend on their own, therefore they had remained silent. However, while it worsened, the marriage of Joni and Doug was the final straw. Loss had shifted the focus. Mastery was at stake. The tipping point was then reached. The reunion with loved ones meant to mend fences. The truth, on the other hand, was revealed. It was all altered by what transpired in that room. No, Joni wasn't there to hear you. As a rule maker, she arrived. Everybody got 60 seconds to talk. Just one. Time to process the trauma of years of abandonment, loss, bewilderment, and spiritual anguish. As soon as the final voice had finished speaking, she rose to her feet, disregarded what they had said, and left. A chilling reminder of how far things had strayed, with no sobs, prayers, or attempts at reconciliation. The bleeding in the ministry began from that point onward. There was a lack of public announcements made behind closed doors. Then they departed. Veterans of the staff stepped down. Invitations were turned down by pastors who had previously lauded Dayar. Support from ministry partners was gradually dwindling. No more emails. Even as donations began to fall, Joni pretended everything was okay on television and smiled. Still, the general public sensed that something was seriously amiss. The Dayar spirit, togetherness, candor, and openness were vanished. Image management had supplanted it. A sense of control and maintaining the appearance of favor, blessing, and anointing pervaded everything. But behind the scenes there were sobs. Physical altercations occurred. These were heartfelt discussions between old acquaintances who were concerned about the state of the ministry in which they had formerly put their faith. Then the moment that broke the spell arrived. The leaked audio. A valued friend and minister named Jimmy Evans was overheard in an intimate discussion. At that same second, he validated what many had suspected. He came clean about being asked to tell Jonathan Lamb to bow down to Joni as the ministry's official Godspeaker. Disrespect, disgrace, and submission. Disagreement over leadership wasn't the only topic of that discussion. Spiritual manipulation was what it was. It demonstrated the extent to which Joni was attempting to exert authority. In addition to her role as an unwavering leader, she was also a heartbroken widow. The public was taken aback. The once truth-standing ministry. Something darker had replaced healing, something that punished dissonance and valued allegiance to a human rather than God, and it had transformed into something else entirely. At that point, everything started to fall apart. The audience lost interest. Some donors discreetly withdrew their support. Comments on social media posts, which used to be. Instead of joy and encouragement, there were worries, questions, and sadness. I am missing Jonathan. When did Susie disappear? Why won't Joni just admit the truth? Silence in the face of truth is inherently guilt-inducing, and Dayar's silence exacerbated the situation. It hurt considerably more when it happened behind the scenes. After a while, friends turned into complete strangers. It was all-out war in the studio. They were the ones who had formerly confided in each other. A wall of secrecy now separated meals, prayers, and sermons. Continuing, Joni. To make a sermon. She grinned. Her role was to host. She journeyed. Her closest associates, however, had shifted. Everyone who had ever told her the truth had vanished. Succeeded by yes men. Following Marcus's passing, she wed Doug Weiss, and he was now standing by her side. However, he did not come to bring healing. He stood guard over the story and its new image. And that is the image that this has always been about. The foundation of Dayar's legacy was the outward manifestation of faith, kinship, and harmony. You can't live in denial of your misery forever, and that facade was crumbling before our eyes. You can't hide the truth and hope it stays hidden. Nothing appeared the same after it did. The individuals who were formerly the public faces of Christian. The media had become the epicenter of debate. Once an inspiration to millions, these individuals had become a cautionary story. It wasn't that they weren't nice people, it was that they prioritized power over people. Silence was preferred to honesty by them. Furthermore, spiritual leadership was misunderstood. On an individual level, there has been a quiet collapse. All is calm. Real, albeit slowly. Since the brand wasn't the one that actually took a hit. It meant the world to the individuals who had faith in it. That group. Their fans who lifted them up in prayer, their admiring families, and the Christians who saw Dayar as unique. It was, in many respects, love and vision constituted its foundation. However, its course was inevitably derailed. It was not brought down by external forces. Because the truth was revealed, it collapsed. And when that occurs, the imperfections will be seen through any combination of stage lighting, worship music, and broadcast production. Because the end isn't far off when a ministry prioritizes outward appearances above internal values. Question: